A question that I'm often asked by different chess fans, like you guys watching this video, is, Max, what is the most brilliant chess game you've ever played? And it's a good question, actually, because my style, I think, was not really aimed at trying to play the most beautiful or most creative way possible, but just doing whatever worked to get the best possible result. That being said, there was a game that I played that did actually win a Brilliancy Prize for a chess tournament. So that's the game I'll be sharing with you here. It was a game that I played against Ray Young in the 2016 Hjorth Open. For those who don't know, Greg Hjorth was this top Australian chess player in the 1980s. Very brilliant mind, super creative player. Not a lot of players know about him because he stopped playing chess early in his 20s, but he went on to become a top mathematician, as it were. Very talented in this area. So I guess I was very inspired by Hjorth to play in a very creative spirit myself in this particular game. Now, it's true my opponent was only rated 2000, but I still think that this is a sort of game I could very easily potentially play against a much higher rated player as well from how it played out. So let's see how the game went. I played knight f3, and this is when I went through my phase of not playing particularly theoretical openings, but playing more, trying to get the opponent onto their own out of their territory and into some unusual kind of positions. So I played this move of e3 at this point, which is not as critical as the move c4 that I subsequently recommended in the tricky knight f3 repertoire. I'll put the link in the description below for those who want to check that out. So after e3, he played g6. I knew that my opponent was a Grunfeld player, so I kind of prepared this on the bus trip to the Melbourne tournament, where I prepared this idea that I would go bishop b2, kind of playing in a Nakamura kind of style, with b3 and going for d4 or c4 depending on what they play. So he stuck with his Grunfeld approach of playing d5 here, and that's what I was counting on actually, because now the move c4 gains a little bit in strength as such, because whichever way that black deals with this attack, he's going to make some small sort of concession of sorts. If he takes on c4, that is the move that a computer recommends, but then I can play bishop takes c4, and this is actually a position I covered in Chess Grinds with a nice win by Nepomniachtchi against Linnea Dominguez with c5 d4. Again, I'll put that link in the suggested video above so that you can check that out if you want to learn a lot more about these types of positions and what happens if black does play in the very best way. My idea is that if he does castle instead, just play some normal move, then I would play c takes d5. And it's kind of like a Grunfeld where, knight takes d5 is not as effective as before. Maybe you should take with the queen and just try to go c5. But I get a tempo on the queen, so it's not so bad from white's perspective. But after knight to d5, my idea was I would take. And then after king takes, I could just play, I was going to play d4, but maybe queen c1 and not letting him get c5 might be a bit more precise. And I think that you could make an argument that with moves like bishop e2, castles d4, that white does have the better side, I think, of equality, because black doesn't have that Grunfeld bishop pressuring the long diagonal, and I think white's moves are much more natural than black's in this kind of structure. Well, my opponent played the move c6, the Schlechter approach, and I think that this is almost the best possible version of a Schlechter that you could get as white after castles. And what might be the reason for that? Well, while you're thinking about this, do make sure to hit that thumbs up button if you're enjoying the video so far, and subscribe to my channel, of course. So the answer is that I haven't played the move d4 yet. So that means my bishop still has this nice long diagonal, and this c6 approach is more of a, let's say, defensive kind of setup for black. Now, to be fair, since I played this game, the engines have gone a lot deeper in analyzing even these, random positions, and I think that an approach like playing e6 and meaning d4 b6 would, I think, keep white's advantage to a minimum. I mean, the bishop probably is more naturally placed on d6 than g7, but it's not like it's the end of the world for black either. Bishop to b7, queen c2. Actually, maybe I'd go knight e5 and try go f4 and get some sort of stonewall style sort of play. But okay, to be fair, black should objectively have quite a reasonable position with, normal moves, knight d7, queen e7. At some point, he's probably going to play c5 and try to activate the bishop. So, this double fiend carry is reasonably flexible and reasonably solid for black. But instead, he tried to play more aggressively. I guess it's one thing to keep in mind that, Grunfeld players, they tend not to like these very slow strategic types of positions. They want to instead play a lot more dynamically in general. So maybe that's why I decided to play the move bishop f5 and try to develop the bishop actively. And I think that if White had played the move d4 already, this would absolutely be a good plan to put the knight on e4 and to simply put some pressure that way. Here I think it's a little bit less effective when White can still play a move like d3 and sort of put the blot on the bishop in that way. Well, I played the move knight to c3, and knight to e4 was kind of like a semi-bluff, sort of saying, well, I'm not really afraid if you play the move knight to e4, because I can always just block it like knight d4, for example. At this point, I think that it's even if here, if black plays some move like, let's say, e6, or even a move like rook to e8, for example, just going for the e5 push. Even here, I think that after something like d4 and knight d7, that this is only a very small advantage for White. You know, I can certainly, in the worst case, I can play c takes d5 and get this position, you know, where the knight and the bishop are a little bit offside. And I'd much rather be on c6 and d6. But my pieces are also not the most active, so probably after something like rook c1 or, let's say, a4, I think that it's only a small pull for White to work with here. But then he played this move, knight to d7, and it dawned on me that this move actually is a strategic mistake. But the question is, why is it a strategic mistake? Now this is a chance for you to turn your thinking caps on and see if you can come up with the best move with White to play, while I have this refreshing sip of water. Okay, you've unpaused the video, or you just want to know the answer so we can get to the beautiful, massive sacrifices. So the move knight d4 is the key move. If you let black get in the move e5 for free, you know, scot-free, black's just going to have the center in a very comfortable position in general. But by playing knight d4, I'm now going after his bishop. If he plays a move like e6, I have a few different options available. I could even just play a move like d3 here and kind of wait for a move like c5 and only then take and mess up his pawn structure. You know, in that case, I will have the bishop pair and he will have double pawns. And that's what would constitute and define White's big advantage here. If they go h5 trying to stop some g4, well, maybe I go h3 and just kind of renew the idea of playing g4 at the right moment to potentially win a piece. I think this is what my opponent was scared of, that somehow I'd have g4 one day and somehow I would just trap his bishop. It doesn't work that well at the moment because he does have c5 and he can start to, you know, get some counterplay in that case. It's a bit messy, but it ends up being okay for the second player. But then he played this move e5 and I was like, okay, I'm not sure if you really can get away with that, because now after knight f5, gf5, I mean, his structure is not so unhealthy for black if he's got all the pawns in a nice sort of pawn chain like this, you know, all sort of chunky and together. But here, that pawn on e5 is kind of overshot, and that pawn f5 doesn't really have a pawn that can defend it. And that's why I played the move queen c2. Honestly, I probably played a bit too fast in this game. You know, I probably should play the move cd5, objectively speaking. You know, if knight takes d5, well, then I can take, and I think that this probably gives me a bigger advantage than what I got in the game. You know, at a good moment, I can play a move like d4 and just try to break up this structure, and I think that would be very, very unpleasant for black. But I played queen c2. I played a little more in a hyper-modern kind of spirit, which I think the reason is probably less precise. He does have the option to go d4, and I mean, white is still better, but at least he managed to get a little share of the space in the center in the meantime. And you know, knight a4, he can go knight to e4. So it's not like I'm just winning a pawn by force here. He is able to keep things at least vaguely solid as such. But he played the move e4, and this is a position I remember that back when I played this game, I was still doing a lot of private one-on-one chess coaching before I learned about a much better model of coaching chess, which again, you know, if you check the link in the description, that will tell you about this better model for you guys. But anyway, after e4, a very instructive point here is that you might think, well, okay, the double pawns are really weak on f5, and you know, I can try to attack it. But if you try to maneuver with the pieces here, what you're going to find is actually not that easy to actually win that pawn without first opening the position. So what I kind of realized here is that actually you want to play the move f3 as white. And the reason you want to play f3 is that you actually want to take and you want to undouble their pawns. And the reason sort of becomes apparent in the way the game played out after knight e5, f takes e4, and f takes e4. An instructive point is that even though the pawn is undoubled, still the weakness on the light square remains. And with the move rook f5, I'm just piling on that pressure. And it's also just a very beautiful outpost for my rook, where it's not that easy for him to attack it with his pieces. The computer's already saying that the best move is knight d3 and just giving up a pawn, but obviously that's a very difficult decision to make in a game. So he played knight to g6 and he kept the pieces on the board. I played the move rook a to f1. And you're going to notice one thing I'm doing very well that you'll see a lot of strong players do, is that they make sure that all of their pieces are involved in the game. And they try to develop their pieces as efficiently as possible. So they're not going to waste moves on things like a3 or h3 without some extremely good reason to do so, like if there's no other really good choice. And at this point, actually, I think I was expecting my opponent to play the move of d4. You know, if they play knight e4, there's going to be some nasty d3 tactics in some different positions. But I can simply play e takes f4, and it turns out that with threats like knight d5 or even knight d1 in the mix, that this is just... Well, black's position is kind of collapsing because he has way too many weaknesses at this point. So he played rook c8. You know, strategically, it's a logical move to position the rook opposite my queen. You know, it means that if I were to play c takes d5, he can go c takes, and, you know, I don't have some knight d5 at some point because of the pin on the queen. And yeah, I mean, white is still technically winning at this point on a strategic level, but here is where this is the reason why the game was a chess brilliancy. Because I came up with this very deep combination. It more or less just plays for the complete domination of the position. If you're wondering how I came up with this combination, well, I did it by liking and subscribing. But okay, on a more serious note, it was because I was solving a very large number of tactics puzzles around this time. I think I was spending about 4 hours a day solving tactics puzzles, something really crazy like this. And the result was I had this very sharp tactical vision. I was just seeing the tactics almost instantly over the board. And so this is a good moment to pause the video if you want to try and find the brilliant idea that I came up with. I think that, well, just the fact it's brilliant will sort of allow you to narrow it down to a few candidate moves as white. So the answer is that I played this double exchange sack with rook takes f6, rook takes f6, and now rook takes f6. And black doesn't really have a way to ignore it because I already have 2 bishops for the rook, which is a massive material advantage. So he has to take, and then I go knight takes d5. And at this point, I mean, the computer is saying that you don't have better than queen takes b2, but if you play queen takes b2, you're simply down material here. You know, white's got 2 pawns for and a queen for 2 rooks, which is a little bit too much here. I mean, when it comes to comparing the queen and the rooks, I tend to rate the queen as being worth about 9 3/4 pawns, so 9.75 pawns on average. And the rooks tend to be about 10 points on average. But the rooks tend to get a little bit better as the game goes on. So that's one reason why deep into the endgame, the rooks may prove to be better than the queen if the rooks can kind of stabilize and keep themselves defended. But obviously with 2 pawns, that's not going to be the case when white's 2 pawns up. Black played to move queen to d8 in the game, because if you go queen to h4, well, I was just going to play to move g3, and unfortunately, if you try to keep your queen active with a move like queen to h3, for example, I can simply play like queen knight to f6 and basically trap the queen in a move like bishop g4. Okay, technically it's not trapped, he has h6, but yeah, it's pretty bad from black's perspective. You know, I can even take the rook, I can take the pawn with check, so you kind of see that I'm getting my material back and still having a complete control over the position. So the game instead saw queen to d8, and I would see my master stroke that is to play knight f6, and well, it's just a very beautiful battery that I have here with the bishop and the knight, and the king is going to have to walk into it. You know, if king g7, I was just going to play queen c3, and just prepare some sort of check, like invading with the queen and just crashing through that way. And black doesn't have a really great way to deal with it. You know, king h6, I can go knight g4, and I'll still be able to bring more pieces into the attack in due season. So we played king to h8, and you know, at this point the move I played is technically not the most clinical way to win, but it did prove to be good enough. What I should do if I want to win in the fastest way is I should just not like outthink myself and be like, oh, I'm such a genius, I didn't take the free pawn. But instead I should simply take knight takes e4. You know, if king g8, I still can just move the knight back and forth and do what I did in the game, but having an extra pawn, which makes a big difference. The reason I didn't play this, I was worried about f6, and I felt like the move knight to f6 should somehow be winning, but I wasn't quite sure how. But actually it turns out to be really obvious. I can just play the move queen to f5, and I missed this because, well, I was being dumb. And after king to g7, what I missed is that I can just play bishop takes f6, queen takes f6, and then queen takes c8, and I'm just up a million pawns, and that's GG. But instead I played queen c3, and I think I was just sort of so drawn by just this beauty of having like this queen and just having black not having a really useful move in the position. I just thought, well, he can't do anything, so I can take my time and I can prepare it. But it turns out he does have the move c5, and now I should kind of shoot my shot, because if I give him time to go rook c6 and, you know, play f6, he will be able to somewhat consolidate. So I decide to cash out my chips with knight takes e4, f6, and then I just play knight takes f6 here, just taking more of the pawns. Obviously, if I'm able to move that knight and get a queen g7 mate, well, that's not what the doctor ordered for black. So we decide to give it up with queen f6. You don't want to play queen c2 because knight e5 will break the pin on the queen. So you play queen f6. This is what I did. Bishop takes. And at this point, I mean, I'm just way ahead. Like, I have not just like 3 pawns for the exchange, which already in itself is enough to win. But I also have this beautiful bishop pair that is just way better than the rook and the knight in terms of the coordination of the pieces. At least like relative to a normal material value. I'm going to go for the final moves relatively quickly, because not a great deal kind of happened from this point. It was just me converting the advantage. But I know there are some of you, like, you get these positions that you know are winning and you're just not quite sure how to put that ball in the back of the net. So let's see how to do it. King f2, rook f8. I mean, my technique was not perfect. I mean, d4 and, you know, just pushing the pawns is a bit more efficient. But I decided to first just kill his knight, just not give him any sort of counterplay, and just make 100% sure that I win this game. So king e6 now, I played d4. He played h5, which is already a little bit desperate. You know, king to g2. Now I'm a little bit wiser. I would probably play h4 and just fix that pawn as a weakness, because now it's not going anywhere. But I played king g2 instead and allowed him to, well, to make this trade h4. And, you know, he tried to trick me here with this move hg3, trying to sacrifice the piece at least to try and change the position somehow. And after g8, actually I missed a good move at this point. Actually, could have played the move bishop to e4 here, just kind of waiting a move to take that pawn, and also, you know, kind of preparing like d5 and all this kind of stuff. But okay, I played d5 first, which okay, is also completely winning. I played king takes h2, he played rook f2, and he started grabbing this pawn on a2. So this was his idea to try to get this pawn and, you know, try to create some sort of counterplay with the a pawn. Because one thing to keep in mind is it can sometimes take a little bit of time for the bishops to actually coordinate and sort of get united in working together. But here it's actually pretty easy. You know, after e4, my bishops are perfectly poised to support the pawns. After rook a3, I played the move bishop f6. I mean, technically e5 is faster, but it doesn't really matter at this point. You know, he's not really in time to go rook b4, because I'm just going to keep pushing my pawn with a check and queening it. The game ended a5, and, you know, again, bishop b8 is not strictly necessary, but I just wanted to not give him any counterplay whatsoever. So I had rook b4, e5, king c7, d6, and, well, we can see that he's not able to block the pawn of his king, because my bishops are supporting the queening squares. And after king b7, I just played the move d7. You're not even bothering to stop the rook c4, bishop c5, b5, because my pawn is queening by force, and well, he simply resigned here, because he can't stop my pawn queening, and then the next one will queen, and that's all she wrote. So yeah, that was my game with my chess brilliancy. Is it the most brilliant game I ever played? If I try really hard, there's probably more brilliant games I've played, to be fair. But it's definitely one game that made me feel really good at the time. You know, it certainly felt great to, sort of play these beautiful sacrifices and go for the domination. And I did win a Brilliancy Prize, so there is that. So yeah, that was the game I want to share with you guys. If you enjoyed this video, do make sure to smash that like button and also subscribe to the channel. And finally, one final favor to ask of you guys. When you do subscribe, my invitation for you is to say, I'm subscribed in the comment section below. That way I can welcome you to the Illingworth Chess channel and just make our family even bigger and have a really great time improving our chess together. So yeah, glad you guys enjoyed the game. Good luck playing your own brilliancies in your own games, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.